colleague Senator Murphy, because of our different schedules, has something going on right after this, so I want you to be able to get there on time. What we've seen over this past week is clear, powerful, undeniable evidence of a violation of law, an abuse of power, and betrayal of the President's oath of office. What's ahead now is to corroborate and confirm that evidence through additional documents, evidence of more calls, and witnesses who have knowledge about these violations of law, abuse of power, and betrayals of oath of office. And I hope that that corroborating evidence will be pursued as swiftly as possible, deliberately and thoroughly, so that this matter can be brought to conclusion and the American people can be given the truth. Central to corroborating this evidence are other witnesses, like the Attorney General of the United States, who seemingly was deeply involved, and he must be held accountable along with others who have knowledge about these violations of law and betrayal of trust and abuse of power. The focus must be on the President for the very distinct and discreet acts in connection with his soliciting assistance from a foreign power for his personal, private, political benefit. That is a violation of law and abuse of power. There's been a lot of talk about the nature of his conversation with the Ukrainian president, his sounding like a mob boss. As I said, I prosecuted mob bosses. I have almost never heard a conversation like this one. In fact, most mob bosses are smarter and more subtle than the president was in this conversation, because clearly he was pressuring and even extorting the president of Ukraine to benefit his political campaign by getting dirt on a political opponent. But the law doesn't require pressure or extortion. The law doesn't require a quid pro quo. The law forbids soliciting or accepting assistance from a foreign power in connection with a political campaign. That's a violation of law. And in this case, the abuse of trust and power was in fact soliciting foreign interference in our elections. And there was a clear national security threat involved here. First, by pressuring that foreign leader and violating the law, he was opening himself to pressure and perhaps extortion by a foreign government. And second, he was inviting foreign meddling and interference in our election. Equally important was the cover-up that apparently followed it. There's evidence that the notes of that call were misclassified in a covert action file in a super secret server that is accessible only with a certain code. There was no reason for these notes to be dealt with in that way. And so the 6 or more people, according to the whistleblower, there were 6 or more people who knew of that misclassification. They have to be called as witnesses to corroborate and confirm that evidence. So my hope is that the continued effort here by the House will be deliberate and thorough but swift. And the Senate is discussing what action and how we may respond if the articles of impeachment are sent to us after a vote by the House. And I think we will be prepared. But let me just say that, as in Watergate, where the president's men ultimately were held accountable, including the Attorney General and top-level staff, here there must be accountability as well for any of the president's staff, particularly at the very top, like the Attorney General, who may have participated in this illegal activity, and they should be held accountable. Anyone who enabled the president and illegally was involved should be held accountable.
Don't you think, Senator, though, that, I mean, impeachment is a political act. There's never going to be a supermajority in the Senate to convict him. So the House can do whatever it wants in terms of this. That's one question. Another question is, politically, hasn't this whole thing with him pointing fingers at the Bidens torpedoed Biden's candidacy? And do you believe that Senator Murphy should release the transcript of his conversation with President Zelensky?
Well, to take them in reverse order, you'll have to ask Senator Murphy
whether
there are any transcripts of his conversation. I have no knowledge of it. Second, the Biden narrative has been completely debunked. And I can go into the weeds if you want me to, but the Biden narrative is a distraction. It's been debunked and it's credited. There is no credible person who believes any of it. And third, on the politics, first of all, we are at a moment of reckoning. We are at a moment of reckoning in this country where the President of the United States has invited interference by a foreign government in our election, has used his office to illegally solicit help from a foreign leader in violation of the statute, clearly. The evidence is out of his own mouth, and he must be held accountable. That is a matter of conscience for the United States Congress. It goes beyond politics.
But the other part of my question was about him,
and
just by bringing up the Biden business, and that's being amplified by his supporters.
Well, let me finish my answer to your first question, because I think that's really the important one here. The votes in the Senate are unknown at this point. Yes, the Republicans have a majority. Yes, 60 votes are required. But as the truth comes to the American people, I think my colleagues in the United States Senate are going to respond in the same way Republicans did during Watergate. And that is, eventually, they need to act out of conscience, not just politics. And the two may, in fact, coincide, because they will sense that they're going to be judged harshly, not only by history, but by voters at the ballot box, if they are complicit in the president's lawbreaking. And if they condone his abuse of power, his violation of law, the American people are going to hold them accountable, just as we must hold accountable officials who condoned or participated in it. And as to Biden's candidacy, no, I think the allegations against Joe Biden are part of the president's distraction, momentary distraction. They've been debunked, and we should consider each on its own merit.
Senator, have you seen anything concrete to show that your Republican colleagues might be open to getting rid of the president?
We're seeing some cracks privately, more than publicly at this point. Senators Romney and Sass have said they're very troubled, at the very least. Privately, I think I can say my Republican colleagues appear to be more than troubled. They are deeply concerned about these allegations because they go to the very lifeblood of our democracy, our independence as a nation, the integrity of our democratic institutions. And as one of them said to me the other day, this time the onus is on our side, but if we tolerate foreign meddling in our elections, next time it could be the other side.
Senator, could you explain a little bit about the role the Senate Judiciary Committee would play if the House sends articles of impeachment to the Senate?
The Senate Judiciary Committee would probably not have a central role because the articles of impeachment come to the Senate as a whole. And by the way, just to go back to Mark's question, there is really no choice on the part of the Republican majority to deal with the articles of impeachment. They can't just table them without a vote. They have to have a vote, and that will be the first test if there is a motion to table, a recorded vote, to block Senate consideration. I have a lot of trouble envisioning my Senate colleagues on either side saying, we will not even consider these articles of impeachment. We will deny the American people a vote here.
Just to clarify though, there are no like ancillary responsibilities of the Senate Judiciary Committee?
Under the specific rules, the Senate Judiciary Committee may play a role depending on how it goes, but it is not something that has to be considered first by the
Do
Senate.
you anticipate something, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Sorry?
Do you anticipate the committee having something to do?
I think under the rules, there may be some discretion, but ultimately, the important point is the Senate as a whole has to deal with it.
Why couldn't Senator McConnell do the same thing he did with Merrick Garland, saying there's an election in less than a year, we can
Because
just
the
vote?
rules say it has to be taken up immediately.
What's,
So it would have to be blocked by he would have to file a motion to table.
Right,
There would then have to be a vote on it.
60 votes.
Exactly.
what's the threat of an impeachment investigation, possible voting of articles of impeachment, and then whatever the Senate? What's the threat of in a already polarized country of being just torn even more asunder and perhaps irreparably?
Well, I've talked to some of my colleagues about how we deal with the business at hand as we go forward. And, for example, on gun violence, our negotiations with the White House on gun violence prevention, the emergency risk orders, are going forward. We had a session just this week, a meeting at the White House. I was called by some of the top White House staff. In fact, on Tuesday, even as Nancy Pelosi was announcing the impeachment proceeding, hours later, the White House was calling me to say we need to move forward on gun violence prevention, on emergency risk protection orders. And I think that the same should happen on infrastructure, as well as election security, which is tied directly to this potential violation of law. I think we need to move forward and do the people's business. And I know you may think it's impossible, but think back to the Clinton impeachment. In fact, Bill Clinton saw it to his advantage to move forward with substantive action, even while he was under the threat of impeachment.
Well, that's in Washington. I'm asking you about the American people. I'm asking you about the American election. If we go through impeachment, we're already in a polarized country politically. What's the threat of an impeachment investigation and anything that results from it of tearing the country further apart and driving wedges even deeper?
Well, that's a good question, long term. I think if impeachment is done in a responsible and deliberate way, whatever the outcome, it will tend to bring people together rather than drive them apart. I think that the outcome will depend on whether the process is deliberate, thoughtful, thorough, and swift, not a prolonged, interminable investigation, but a focused, corroborating inquiry that looks to the witnesses documents that are necessary to confirm the allegations that are made. These allegations are so powerful. The evidence is so persuasive and detailed that an inquiry really is necessary to corroborate them, but I think the American people will come together on the merits.
What would you say, though, to concerns that have been raised that the impeachment inquiry could threaten democratic chances in the 2020 election?
We have a responsibility to move forward with an impeachment proceeding. The facts are undeniable. The evidence is there. It has to be corroborated. The additional witness should be called. The other documents have to be pursued. But there's a responsibility here to enforce our responsibility, which is a constitutional obligation. And we need to do it as swiftly as possible so as to avoid any kind of encumbering of the upcoming election. We have more than ample time to do it.
But does part of the process have to be selling the American public on this? I mean, the idea that it will sell itself, I mean, we saw after the Mueller report, support was very low for impeachment, even from people who had concerns about what happened and thought that it was unpresidential. There wasn't really momentum for impeachment. So you can say this will sell itself, but do you have to make a concerted effort to convince the American public that this is necessary?
There needs to be education. It's already happening. The polls already show the American people moving toward much more favorable view of impeachment. In fact, saying it's necessary. I think the more people see and hear and learn, the more voices and faces coming forward, the more powerfully they will feel the proceeding has to move forward, whatever the outcome. I'm not prejudging the outcome. I do say there is powerful, incriminating evidence here from the president's own mouth, documents compiled by his own staff, and that's the reason why they sought to hire him. They knew how deeply wrong he was to make this request, put pressure on a foreign leader in this way for his own political, personal benefit. They knew he was breaking the law and betraying his oath of office, and that's why they did these records of call.
So former Vice President Biden, when he was the vice president, did not pressure the Ukrainians to fire a prosecutor. He never said that.
In no way is what former Vice President Biden did comparable to what President Trump did.
But he did do it, correct?
He did not pressure the president of the Ukraine to act in his personal political benefit.
With regard to yesterday, the hearsay, secondhand information comment by the NDI, what's your reaction to that regarding the whistleblower?
Well, the hearsay, supposed hearsay testimony, some of it came out in the record of call. So the record of call, which came out subsequent to the Director of National Intelligence and the Inspector General hearing what the whistleblower had to say, confirms, in effect, the whistleblower's account. That record of call is so powerful. It is so deeply incriminating. It's the president's own words showing a violation of law, and then the cover-up afterward confirming consciousness of guilt. You know, concealment shows consciousness of guilt. And so I think there is deeply powerful, incriminating evidence there that is in no way hearsay. But the best way to confirm hearsay evidence is to hear from the witnesses who have direct knowledge, and that's what has to be done to corroborate any kind of hearsay.
The Quinnipiac poll was done during the time when this story was getting a lot of coverage. It was before the release of the transcripts and the whistleblower, but the story had been getting a lot of coverage, and it only showed 37% were in favor of impeachment. My guess is that's probably what it would have been 2 weeks ago. I mean, that doesn't show that there's a groundswell of support for impeachment.
The public The polls taken so far show a shift. Eventually, it will be a seismic shift, just as happened during Watergate. At the beginning of the Watergate hearing, people were against impeachment. By the end, a majority in favor. But one way or the other, Mark, let me just be very clear. We have a constitutional responsibility. We can't decide we are not going to move forward with impeachment proceeding simply because the polls are against it. There is nothing more serious and solemn and nothing more important to put above politics and polls than this kind of impeachment inquiry and proceeding.
Well, maybe your memory's better than mine, but I recall this is purely a House game right now. But I recall that in '73, was it, that the Senate held hearings on the Watergate allegations. Why wouldn't that happen again? It was a bipartisan group of senators, including Senator Weicker. Why wouldn't that happen again?
Because my recollection is the inquiry began before the articles of impeachment were done. So here, there needs to be an inquiry by the House, and it will be evidently done primarily by the House Intelligence Committee.
Right.
Are you concerned that the way the House is proceeding might be too diffuse? Because you recommended that they form a select committee, which would put all that investigative power and such in one spot.
Well, I think what Speaker Pelosi has done is, in effect, to concentrate the inquiry in the House Intelligence Committee. So, in effect, she has done what I recommended, call it a select committee, call it the House Intelligence Committee. I think there'll be input from the other committees, but she has provided a focal point.
Well,
Senator,
isn't the official name Select House Committee on
Senator, on the gun issue, do you have any meetings scheduled coming up regarding the red flag legislation? And also, I know Senator Murphy is taking more of the lead on the background checks, but the president sort of lashed out at him, and he said the other day that he wasn't sure. He seemed a little concerned about how that's going to affect those talks. But do you think background checks legislation is now dead because of this?
Well, within hours of the impeachment announcement, one of the very most prominent members of the White House called me to say that their hope is to move forward. They are focused on gun violence prevention. They are very favorably inclined toward the emergency risk protection order law that Senator Graham and I have negotiated. We are at the 3-yard line on that proposal. And we can move forward if the White House is willing to do so. And the same is true, I hope, on universal background checks and on a safe storage law and on a number of other measures. For example, if somebody falsely represents that they are eligible to buy a gun and they try to buy one, there should be criminal penalties for it. The so-called try and buy measure.
So do you think that the threat of this impeachment might be leveraged to get some of those things approved by him or endorsed by him? Because Senator McConnell has said that they won't do any of this stuff unless the president comes out in favor.
You know, just so that everybody understands the way things can shift in the Senate, very recently, as you may recall, just this week, there was a proposal for unanimous consent on a resolution that the Inspector General's report be provided to Congress by the DNI. Everyone expected Mitch McConnell would object. He didn't.
Right.
So, you know, that's a sign of what may be changing here. the force of this lawbreaking, abuse of power, betrayal of oath of office, is so powerful, and I think will be so evident and graphic and dramatic to the American people that the vast majority will believe that there's a responsibility to move forward with the impeachment investigation and proceeding. Now, there may always be a base of support for Donald Trump that thinks he's being victimized, but I think the majority of American people are going to want a deliberate, thorough, swift proceeding.
Good answer.
And thank you very much.
Do you think the Attorney General should recuse
Oh, I'm
himself?
sorry.
Do you think the Attorney General should recuse himself from this matter?
Yeah, the Attorney General unquestionably should recuse himself. You know, he came before our committee and he denied that he has ever started an investigation at the request of the president. He was involved in declining a prosecution based on a referral from the intelligence community. So he has been deeply involved from what we know already publicly. And the other involvement that he may have will come to light as this matter proceeds. So without question, the Attorney General should recuse himself, and he should be held accountable if he has participated in violations.
One more question. We had a bunch of kids up here yesterday from the Unified Connecticut College Republicans. They were relating to us incidents of harassment, not only by other students, but by professors, because they support the president and have conservative views. How do you feel about that?
Harassment for any kind of views, any sort of political views or religious beliefs or any kind of convictions is absolutely abhorrent. Thank you.